Okay, I'm here with Robert Scovill, who is a concert sound engineer and the senior specialist for Avid Products. Robert, good to have you here.
Thanks, pleasure.
I'd like to start out today by asking you, what's the most bizarre and unexpected failure you've had on a live gig? Because we've all had them.
Let's see. Most bizarre, unexpected failure. Well, I don't know if I'd call this a failure, but it was pretty exciting. I remember once I was doing Def Leppard. I was mixing front of house for Def Leppard, and we were in the middle of the United States on a tour. We were doing outdoor shows, and we were doing a racetrack, and I mean, it started raining at the track. And this was kind of one of these kind of state fair gigs where the logistics weren't totally all sorted out anyway. It was a little shaky.
So rain just makes it more exciting.
Yeah. Puts a whole new level of tension on the day.
Yeah.
So over the front of house position, they had built this little lean-to, tarpaulin covered. You know where I'm going with this,
I know
right?
where this is going.
And at one point, it was just pissing down rain. It couldn't have rained any harder, And at some point, I kind of looked up and I could see the roof
forming a pool,
starting to form a pool, and I alertly say to my assistant, "Hey, I think you ought to get a broom or something. Let's push that water off. It's looking a little dangerous, etc." So he goes and gets this push broom that is sitting at the back of the thing and goes to push up on it, not realizing that it's right on a taped seam on the thing. So pushes up, and of course the broom goes right through it. Whoosh. I couldn't have been wetter if you'd have thrown me in a swimming pool.
Wow.
And good on the band. They just kept on playing. The PA's making all this noise, and it was just one of those moments where it's just pure survival at that point. And I grabbed a pair of headphones and kind of just turned on some pink noise and said, "Okay, we got to find a couple of outputs on this console that are working." And luckily, it was.
So you're on analog desk?
Yeah, this was analog.
That's good. That
Ironically,
means
if we'd have been digital, it probably would have all worked.
Yeah.
So. I found 2 buses that were worked in, and we switched it over, and were able to finish the show, and it was pretty exciting. So that was pretty spectacular.
You do what you have to in those situations, don't you?
It's you turn into a MASH unit at that point. We just got to save the patient, whatever it takes.
Triage. Okay, look, that's sort of an interesting thing, because it brings us from a world which started out being only analog to now we're at the point where we are. So often seeing digital consoles around, and obviously that brings with it the benefit of being able to have a show file that you can save.
Yeah.
Now you were involved in a discussion a while back regarding who owns the show file.
It was. I actually brought this up. Funny enough, at an AES conference, I was hosting a panel, and it wasn't on that topic in any way, shape, or form, but it was a very early panel on digital consoles and what it might mean for the workflows going forward for audio engineers. I thought it was really going to be centered in that, and somehow the discussion kind of turned to that, and I was really just amazed in the audience at what the audience perspective of who owned that show file was, and it was just flat out wrong. There was absolute legal precedent for it to say, you don't own that show file because it was made as a work for hire. It's owned by the band. In the strictest definition of the law, it's owned by your employer.
You're employed to generate this.
Yeah. And I actually, years later now, I had actually written a blog that addressed this, where I actually saw this in play at a show. I was at a show where, a monitor engineer was kind of let go, and he decided he was going to take his show file, and it was kind of, it could have turned into a very, very ugly scene, and luckily they were able to coax him into giving that show file back by kind of stating everything that could go wrong here and things that he would be on the hook for, So, at the end of the day, I say to the engineers, how much do you really want to own this show file? Because, the art is in here, not in the numbers that are in the show file, Anybody who uses that show file is just going to be painting by numbers anyway, so. If you're really that concerned about it, you can't really be that, own your skill that much, if it can be given away like that. So everybody relax a little bit,
Yeah, chill out. It's an interesting thing, I think, always inheriting someone else's show file, and I hear mixed reports from people, some positive, some negative, because everyone does things their own way.
Right.
What's been your experience with inheriting other people's show files? Has it ever happened to you?
Well, only by choice. If I've walked in on something where I know I'm going to have to work under the gun, and I know that person's already got a head start and has things established on the console where I might have to walk in cold, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge advantage to have something up and working. But by the same token, if I have time, I probably won't use it. I'll probably just start my own file and do my own thing, etc. But there can be a tremendous advantage to it. I give you the flip side of it in analog. I can remember taking over for an engineer on a tour. Actually, a number of engineers. They had gone through countless engineers over a period of weeks where they were just churning through them and firing them. And I had walked in a situation on an analog console where the artist was kind of in control of the sound checks and had established all these things on the console, and it was just abysmal. It was absolutely abysmal. It could not have sounded worse, I don't think. And here I am sitting with all of these settings that I'm kind of handcuffed to for a little while, trying to make this work. And at some point I just had to say to the artist, I didn't even say it to the artist, at some point I zeroed the console, and the artist got very upset about it, but I was like, look, you brought me here for a reason, let me do my gig. If you hate it, I'll leave. If you love it, I'll stay. But I can't just work and second guess what everybody else has done and what you've done on the console. It's just not going to work that way, So.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is that, of course, every venue's different, and mic placement affects things like that. We were talking a little earlier about virtual sound check, which is something that's come a long way, and that's been a big change over the past few years, that you can now do that. What do you think is going to be the next big change that we see in the next 10 years, say?
Well, who can look into the crystal ball really, but things that I can see coming down the road, especially with regard to technology, is that we're going to see, we're going to kind of run out of this time where the differences between different manufacturers' products are based in I/O counts and bus counts and things like that. Where it's going to be very analogous to where recording was, 10 or 15 years ago, even. Where I can remember a time where we were in open reel digital, and there was a mindset of, my gosh, 96 tracks. I mean, are we ever going to need more than 96 tracks? 248 machines slaved together. Yet, Pro Tools kind of showed us that in the post world, we need hundreds of tracks. Right, if they're there, we will find the use for them. And I think we're going to go through a similar time in live sound where, we're going to get to a point where there's going to be hundreds of inputs readily available to any system. There's going to be, we have a tendency of saying now 64 is the new 48, right? So, 64 buses, 72 buses, 96 buses, mono or stereo on a console will become commonplace. The numbers will not be the challenge after a while. The challenge will be who designs the best user interface, who allows you to navigate all of those things under pressure and in the moment. Because that's going to separate the men from the boys, in my opinion, in terms of companies and manufacturers, the people that really have that sorted out and understand how to allow a user to navigate those things,
So it's not going to be a question of capacity, but actually being able
functionality
to use that easily.
Yeah. Because we have that challenge in live sound. That's been part of the challenge with digital, because the learning curve can be so steep. And we have some really unique challenges now in digital with live sound, I think, even compared to in the recording studio world, although it's similar. Meaning, for the longest period of time, when we were in analog, if you learned how to operate one analog console, you could literally get on any console and kind of get to work and kind of go, okay, I see what they're doing here. With digital, just not the case. They all operate so radically different, and the fundamental things that are common to all of them are so low. There's just, and so narrow that you can't find any commonality in them, really. And what this is forcing engineers to do, I think, is become even more loyal to one brand, because they don't have the time to learn all of the other consoles on the job. Yeah, 'cause that's when they learn it. It's unlike in the studio where we can get in and practice a little bit. We have to learn on the job with live.
Yeah, and it's funny how indeed so much of it, sort of to a point now, there's almost a necessity not only to understand audio, but to understand data to a point.
Truly, well, and that's the challenge. I think that's kind of the challenge I was alluding to in the early days of digital, is that we had people so focused on operation that they forget to mix the music, and mix the show. I've seen guys do it. I've been guilty of it in the earliest days of digital, where you get caught up in that moment of thinking, okay, I know what I want to do, I just don't know how to do it on this thing.
Which page is it?
And then the part is over, the music's done. So, I'm always kind of preaching that in my mixing seminars and clinics, is that, half of your challenge is getting the console in a management state where you can actually mix the event and not concentrate on operation. That should be your goal, is to get that console laid out in a fashion that you can actually mix the event without worrying about operation.
You obviously worked with some huge acts and undoubtedly see a lot of other engineers at work. What do you reckon what are the most common mistakes you see in live sound mixing?
Well, in live sound mixing in general, or in digital mixing? Because I can kind of parse those two things.
Oh, in general and in digital. We can do a two-part answer.
I'll give you this perception, because I'm a big fan of line source, and have been since the early days of VDOS, really establishing the line source mentality for all the manufacturers. And I think it did a very, very important thing for us. From a mixer's perspective, it was one of those things where, when you got on that PA system, the acoustic phase that we're experiencing in the listening field is so accurate compared to what we had in the past, that if you were a really good mixer, it would show you as a really good mixer. If you were a really bad mixer or a really average mixer, it would show you as a bad or average mixer. And previous to that topology of PA systems, I think there was some averaging down of both of those things. If you were a great mixer, you couldn't show it sometimes because the PA distribution of the audio was so poor. The interaction in all the cabinets was so poor. So, that was an important first step in it. We had to get to a point where the PA systems were delivering the audio that we were sending it from the console.
No longer the limiting factor.
Yeah. So that was a big piece of it. With regard to, mistakes that I see, or, however you want to characterize it, to me the biggest challenge is that, given that world that I just spoke about now, to me the biggest thing that is lacking in live sound engineering that I see is mixing skills. Because you kind of have guys that fall typically into one of two camps. Either they're really good at system tuning and PA management, or they're really good mixers. The amount of guys that really, really manage both of those things elegantly and fluently are very small. It's a handful of guys that I would put in that category or in that class. And those two things are inextricably married together, So I would look at it from two perspectives. Like, I've seen some great studio engineers, great mixers, come out live and fall flat on their face, absolutely fail, because they are inept at handling that PA system management. That when they go in the studio, that's a constant for them. When they push up a fader,
it doesn't feed back in the studio.
Yeah. Well, they push up that fader and it doesn't sound right. They know it's one of two places, either the source or the microphone or the placement. That kind of thing. They're not questioning the speaker listening environment, where in live, that's a complete another variable that we have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
And the flip side of that is true too. I've seen guys that are world-renowned, world-class live sound mixers go into the studio and have to mix for that medium and just fall flat on their face because they don't have the mixing skills and haven't taught themselves the resolution, the hearing resolution, to be able to listen in that kind of dynamic environment, So for me, in live sound, it's really mixing skills, and that's the one thing that I think virtual sound check stands the ability to address immediately.
As you were saying, it's sort of it's very hard as an engineer, a live engineer, to be able to hone your craft without a crowd in the room or a band on stage. Yeah. So you kind of answered my next question, which was how many live sound engineers do you think would also be able to work as a system engineer on the same gig? And
I promote that they should. I'm not a proponent of the idea that I'm going to have somebody tune the system and then I'm going to come in and mix the event. I have to be, I know for me personally, I tapped the mic. I know for me personally, I have to be involved in that because I've got to be able to connect the dots when I'm mixing and getting tones. I've got to be able to turn something on and listen to it and make an adjustment and go, no, that's a system problem. That's not a source problem. I've got to be able to discern those two things. And if I haven't been involved in the system tuning, it takes away my ability to really discern. Then you instantly kind of fall into that trap of questioning it at every turn when in fact it may not be the problem. You know.
How much do you think there's a tendency to overprocess signals, and what's your definition of overprocessing?
I don't have one, honestly, and you know, that's all left to the ear, really, isn't it? I mean, I've used this. I'll pay homage to my father here, because I've used this many times when people talk about, oh, well, you know, plugins, people are using too many plugins, or oh, digital sounds this way, blah blah blah. You know, you can't blame the bad plumbing on the pipe wrench. Okay, a human being is making all of those decisions. Those, you know, I've yet to find a Pro Tools system, a digital console, or a plugin that decides to turn itself on and install it and use it. You know, not one single time. So, you know, I look no farther than the person and the choice they're making at that point. It's just a tool. It's absolutely just a tool. You want to have all the tools in your box? Go bring all the tools in your box, but be a craftsman. Learn how to use them properly, right? That's my take on it. So basically, when it sounds bad, it's overprocessed or underprocessed, maybe. Yeah, or maybe it's just a bad approach on the console. You know, I mean, you know,
it could be a bad signal coming in.
Could be a bad sounding band. You know, I mean, isn't that the old adage, right? If it's a great sounding band, they're a great sounding band. If they're a bad sounding band, they have a bad sound engineer, right? That's how it works. Yeah.
I love it. Hey, look, you're in town, obviously, with Avid, and the S3L's out now.
Yep.
Very different from what we've seen in the past.
Yep.
Tell us a bit more. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, this kind of gets into the idea of development of digital, you know, consoles for sure. I mean, this is a different day, different product. For Avid, it's the first live sound product that we've had that is the confluence of of Euphonics and Avid. You know, you're going to see the first product that has the Euphonics influence on the hardware, yet underneath is all still being operated by Venue software. So it's a very exciting time for us. I'm really excited about working with the Euphonics guys to come up with our hardware. I think they'll do just a sensational job. That part's going to be a great marriage. In terms of the S3L, you know, we're starting, you know, it's going to be the first product really that kind of plants the seed for where we're kind of going to go in terms of this combined kind of workflows of recording and live sound. You know, it's going to be the first control surface that is able to control not only the live sound engine, but then switch over and be in charge of the Pro Tools engine as well and mix within Pro Tools. So Yukon capability is going to give us that, and it's Yukon wrapped inside of AVB interconnection for all of the parts and pieces. So really, I mean, we're stepping up into a completely different area of interconnection now. You know, we've been a big supporter of AVB. We think it's going to, well, I mean, it's been ratified by IEEE as the standard now. So even that, I think you'll see a lot of other networking manufacturers in the world, you know, the other little islands, if you will, hopefully become AVB compliant and be able to talk to each other. You know, I think the end game of AVB, as I see it anyway, is that it should be able to make the interconnection as ubiquitous or as universal as the mic cable, right? The mic cable doesn't care what it's plugged into.
It's a common platform.
Right. I mean, it just says I need to get audio from there to there. Yeah. You know what, the Cat5 cable should be the same way. I mean, even though it's a much more complex world, we should be able to plug it in with that kind of reliability. If we don't, then it's doing us a disservice. It's not living up to the dream.
It's getting in the way rather than making it better.
So it should enable all of these things to happen, you know. And for my money, it's going to kind of, you know, we're kind of working in a closed loop world now anyway, where we have these digital mixing systems, you know, that can't really talk to each other. I mean, they can send audio to each other through AES, et cetera, but we should be able to have more interconnection than that. I should be able to take manufacturer A's I/O boxes and use them on my system. Come on, we should be able to do those
things
sorts
like
of things.
gain sharing will work.
Yeah. So that's the hope and the promise of AVB. You know, I think it looks good so far. We'll see how it goes. You know.
Also, I guess it ties in nicely, as you were saying, because there is the Pro Tools integration. How much of that's driven by what we're now seeing, which is a tendency for live acts to be either releasing footage on the internet or even they selling concerts afterwards, you know, with the USB
I
stick
think
and so on.
so much of it is driven by that, but I think there are other workflows that actually drive it, but it plays directly into that. I mean, I do it now. I think, I mean, I know so many acts that, you know, it's so similar to a, you know, live to air plus a remix for post. It's that workflow, essentially. So, you know, while the concert's going on, we may be printing 2-track audio, and we need that in a form that we can give it away to the audience or stream it.
Yeah.
But we also want the ability to go in and remix it for a more refined product that we want to give away later or sell later.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, I know many engineers that are on the road right now. We've kind of developed this saying, there are no days off on the road now. There are only days without shows.
Yeah.
The rest of the time is mixing. Right, so you know you're finding some way to, either in a dressing room or your hotel or something on the day off, take the multi-track that you've recorded the night previous and work on mixing it and chopping it up to deliver to the producers or the label to release later. I mean, that is in play today. That is not a pipe dream. So, you know, one of our goals at Avid is to develop technology that completely enables that and makes it easier. You know, makes that task easier and more refined. You know. So again, S3L really is the first step into that, where you could literally unplug your control surface from whatever you're doing, walk into the hotel room with your Pro Tools laptop and go to work and mix within Pro Tools with the same surface, you know.
Yeah.
So that's a workflow that we see in lots of churches in America and in performance centers, where they will have, right now they're using Venue product to mix live to air, you know, maybe in a broadcast suite, whatever, take the feed and mix live to air because they love the snapshot automation that we can offer with Venue. But it's horrible in post. You know, you don't want to mix in snapshot in post. You want to be in runtime automation in post. So they'll do Venue live to air and then unplug that Pro Tools machine, walk right over and plug it into Icon and go to work in runtime in post. Well, we're trying to merge those two workflows, you know, where you can just, you don't change surfaces. It's the same surface, so.
The line's definitely blurring, isn't it?
I take a little poll at every seminar that I do now. I go, okay, how many of you guys are live sound engineers? A bunch of them raise your hand. How many of you guys are recording engineers? A few people will raise their hand. I go, no, you're all recording engineers. You just don't know it yet. You know, so it's the truism of our world right now, for sure.
Oh, it's going interesting places, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty much all I've got, Robert. So.
Thanks, man. This was
awesome.
awesome.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure. Anytime.
It's been a pleasure.
Always great to be in Australia, man. Love it.
Well, we'll see you again soon.
Okay, be good. Thanks.
Cheers.
Yeah.